Good afternoon. I'm Nikki Beasley, the Director of Housing and Public Policy at the YWCA St. Paul. And on behalf of the entire YW team, I'd like to welcome you to the Equity and Justice Conversation on Women in Leadership Positions. Thank you for taking the time this afternoon to join us in a very important discussion. We are incredibly fortunate to have Shawntera Hardy, Akua Lee Ellis, Kathleen Maron, and Alex Steinman joining us today. The topic we are discussing is women in leadership positions. It is so important to all of us as we move into 2022, working towards equity and justice for all. In our gathering today, we will listen to some powerful words centered on courage, imposter syndrome, wellness, vulnerability, and doing the hard things. A little about Shawntera. Shawntera Hardy is co-founder and chief culture officer for Civic Eagle. She is also the founder of Policy Grounds Consulting and the co-founder of Fearless Commerce. She was formerly commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development, a 2018 Bush Fellow, board chair of the YWCA St. Paul, and will lead our discussion this afternoon. Joining her in this engaging conversation will be three accomplished women who serve in leadership roles: Akua Lee Ellis, Kathleen Maron, and Alex Steinman. Thank you for being with us today, Shawntera, and for the important work you do in our community. And at this point, I will pass it over to Shawntera.
Thank you so much, Nikki. And thank you so much, Gay, and the rest of the team and the board for your just leadership over the last couple of years of having these types of conversations and leading the way with your unapologetic mission of eliminating racism, empowering women. I mean, there's no gray area in the mission. And that's why I absolutely love the YWCA and just, I'm very fortunate to be able to work alongside you in the work that I do. And I'm so excited to have this conversation, as you said, Nikki, with three accomplished, highly esteemed women who are breaking the mold in their respective industries and really showing how to lead out loud. And so I'm really excited about the conversation, excited to engage with everyone in this virtual world. So please put your questions in the chat, your comments. I'll make sure to pay attention to weave them into the conversation. So as stated, I'm Shawntera Hardy. Very excited to be in this conversation, really just to moderate the flow in the conversation and to double tap on some things and to pull people out, walk them on the balcony. I could tell you a little bit about that. And really just be able to guide us through this evening. And so without further ado, I really am excited for each of them to introduce themselves, their role, and for them to just either in one word, which is probably very hard, or one sentence, which is probably still hard, but however they want to just give you a grounding in their leadership style, because I think it's very important for us to have a grounding in their perspective, which I'm pretty sure will be their jumping point as to how they answer the questions that we have in front of us. And so with that, I am going to start with Alex. If you would take the virtual stage and introduce yourself.
Thanks so much, Shawntera, and thank you for having me, everyone. I'm Alex Weststein. I'm the co-founder and CEO of The Coven. We're a community and workspace and for women, non-binary, and trans folks, headquartered in St. Paul, just right across from the YWCA, and with another location in Minneapolis on East Street, and a growing digital community for learning and growth. My leadership style, I would say, is unapologetically kind, which maybe sounds, it's not nice. That doesn't mean I don't give hard feedback, but it's kind, which means I'm honest and give give good feedback in the moment.
Thank you for that. We'll go with Kathleen next. You're on mute, Kathleen.
Kathleen Maron, and I'm the CEO of the Maron Alliance. And our team of coaches is an executive coaching and diversity consulting firm. And prior to that, I was a practicing lawyer at a large national law firm for many years. And the reason I founded this firm 15 years ago is that we work with leaders and teams in high stress professions like law, healthcare, finance, who seek to navigate change, but most of all, to lead inclusively across gender and cross-cultural differences. So I saw a lot of that as a lawyer and as a mediator, and now even more so as an executive coach and a diversity consultant. And so what we do at the Maron Alliance is we really provide people, women and men together, with the leadership skills and the emotional intelligence they need to lead inclusively and become the best version of themselves. So we can talk more about that as we get into some of the topics. And as a former jazz musician, what I really believe in is the power of practice and the value of feedback, because a lot of women and people of color don't get that. And so that's kind of woven through everything that we do. So when we get to my leadership style, my word is resonant. And the reason I say that is it didn't used to be that way when I was a trial lawyer. I learned through hiring my own executive coach that I needed to flex my style really to be an inclusive leader who could resonate with other people of all different walks of life. And so I adapt my style to the person and the situation who's in front of me.
I like that. Akua, can you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Akua Lee Ellis. I am a Senior Vice President of Community Impact at the Greater Twin Cities United Way, and our mission at United Way is to unite change makers, advocate for social good, and develop solutions to address the challenges that no one can solve alone. And in particular, in my role in community impact, I'm really striving towards a vision where we're disrupting inequity, and the extent to which income, race, or place determine one's ability to thrive. So super excited to be here. The St. Paul YWCA is a long-term, amazing partner of ours, and so that much more exciting a conversation that we are about to have. I do want to just touch on something that Alex said around not being nice. I love that you name that. People are often confused when I tell them I am not nice. Doesn't mean I'm not kind, doesn't mean I'm not genuine, but I'm definitely not a nice person. And I think that's important for women in leadership to own. The one word that I would use to describe my leadership style is deliberate.
I love that. So we have kind, resonant, deliberate. That's very, very bold and very, very much so not a word that is kind of normal on the board when folks say, how to describe your leadership style? So I'm very interested in understanding how that shows up in some of our questions that we have here this evening. So I really want to ask, because since March 2020, have you ever been in a space and somebody hasn't said COVID pandemic or something? And so we got to get the COVID question out the way. And so I'm just, in thinking about what you describe as your leadership style, I'm very interested to know, pre-pandemic, did it change? Did it change? Anything shifted with how you describe your leadership style today? Thinking about prior to March, how did you lead? Thinking about all that you and your teams, your families, your friends have navigated with respect to how you had to show up as a leader. Has anything changed? You guys can jump in. Go ahead, Akua.
Yeah, I'll say I'm a warmer leader. Kinder, for sure. A bit more vulnerable.
A bit more vulnerable. In what way?
It's hard to name it. I know it's more vulnerable because of the number of times that my husband has said, I'm surprised you shared that. Just maybe even in the last 6 months. I've heard that a number of times because it doesn't often occur to me to share what's going on with me personally. For most of my career, my perspective would be, it's not your business. We're here to get XYZ done. And with everyone being at home and under so much stress and uncertainty, it has been helpful for me to connect with my team in a deeper way. Like we've built some really strong bonds. We're just having a conversation as a full department today and talking about like just how incredible it has been to be able to advance the body of work. I mean, we have moved a tremendous volume of work remotely. That was something that was really, really, honestly, kind of scary. I didn't know what to expect. I never worked in that type of environment. Kind of had an old school perspective on kind of butts in seats, honestly. And I have grown tremendously as a leader as a result of the way that my team has shown up. And it has made me want to share more. And I see the importance of it.
I heard you say that you it's still none of their business, but you choose to open up to provide insight into a deeper level of what personally makes you and how that kind of is integrated into how you lead is one thing I heard. The other thing I heard is that basically we are all living at work. Let's just name it. We're living at work. And so that line has been crossed. And so in this space, you've been able to go a little bit deeper with your team. Okay. Anyone else want to jump in?
Let me just add one more piece to that. I think that's a great summary. Where it shows up is being more intentional about kind of signaling where my thinking is headed and providing a bit more context on how I am arriving at a decision, because in the absence of physical, proximity, there's a lot of gray area. And I think it's a natural tendency to fill in that uncertainty with a negative, you tend to kind of fill it in with a negative assumption, absent that information. So I work hard to be deliberate in my communication.
I got it. I appreciate that, because when you're in front of somebody, you can pick up body cues, you can pick up energy, you kind of know where they came from. When you like, nobody know what Zoom room you came from. Like they don't know who just left your office. And so you're kind of going that extra mile to give that context to understand kind of your thinking. I appreciate that. Alex, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think that that's super interesting, Akua, because I think I've gone into the other direction. So as a probably chronic oversharer pre-COVID, probably shared maybe too much with a team. And as an entrepreneur, you pour your whole life and soul into a business and an organization. So there's nothing but, yourself on the floor every day. And so I think now that the pandemic has hit and everybody is going through whatever they're going through, I've had to create some like really strong boundaries around for my own mental health. And maybe that's, I still care deeply about what my employees are going through. I still care deeply about, other individuals, but I've had to also like choose to be a kind leader to myself, which was really challenging, I think, pre-COVID, because I just poured everything into all my employees, and like we all just like caring so deeply about them and what they're going through in their moments, that I didn't even take time to process myself what I was going through, 2020 and into now. So I think having time to reflect on that has made me maybe even a little bit more guarded as a leader, but I'll say that in kind of a protective way of myself. And it's actually made me given me much more clear-headedness. I come into meetings like very deliberate and very, clear about what I need out of a meeting, what I'm hopeful to accomplish in the meeting, and kind of ending with like clear next steps and moving forward from a business perspective without kind of having the emotional part of it, which I think I probably was a very open leader in that way, because I came from an environment that was very like anti-emotions before starting a business, swung one direction, and then have now kind of like found a good balance between the two of kind of protecting myself while also being, able to care still.
Thank you for that. So this recalibration that you had to do in order to be able to really get to those boundaries so that mentally you can actually function as a high functioning leader. Yes. And not overwhelm your operating system in a way that folks, that you're like a lot of taking, but also a lot of giving and recalibrating on top of a pandemic, on top of a racial reckoning and fill in the blank and supply chain and at some point being able to recalibrate seems like has been really good for you. And what I'm also hearing is that you went into this leadership role looking to course correct what you had before. And so you went the opposite way. And so in this pandemic, you're like, no, this is really what my leadership style is. Like, this is where I am right here.
Yeah, it's made me a much more compassionate facilitator, because I can kind of come to conversations objectively and hear all of the things without being like clouded by emotion, but I can hear every individual. I can make really sound decisions without, my own, emotional baggage or thoughts, kind of coming into the discussion. So I feel actually it's a much safer space for me to be in mentally, honestly.
I love that. Kathleen?
Yes, well, it's, I think that one of the ways that I've changed is become more comfortable with being uncomfortable and not knowing all of the answers. And so I am still a lawyer, so I still volunteer. I represent children in the foster care system through Children's Law Center. And so instead of large corporations, which is what I did when I was practicing in a big law firm, I do still do that. But I always say, as a former lawyer, I was, drive, and worked in a firm where it was pretty much butts and seats. And so I carried some of that over into my coaching business too. And I found that before the pandemic, I had kind of got to the point where I was driving in the coaching business, which is kind of antithetical. And it was a lovely opportunity. I mean, not that the things that have happened to us have been lovely, but finding a gift out of the dark things that have happened was a real challenge. And so I discovered the power of the pause and being more curious about what's going to emerge and letting go of control. We still need to plan, and then just hold those plans loosely. And it's okay if you don't know all the answers. Because I assembled the team of coaches who are all on my website because we were going to start this great, huge project in January of 2020. And it got postponed to March, and then all of a sudden everything went to a screeching halt. And it was a great opportunity for us to really bond and spend really the past year bonding as a team. And we never would have been able to do that if we had gone forward with all the plans that we'd made at the time. And so it really has taught me to be open to treating, I used to say this and now I actually believe it, that yes lives in the land of no. That you can, if you're optimistic about something and you just take an improvisational approach to things, you can, okay, so that door is closed. So let's look at a different opportunity or a different window, or what can we use this time for? And just see what emerges, which is uncomfortable for a lawyer as well as uncomfortable, even if you're a coach, for running a business, because you want to still be running a business.
Absolutely. I appreciate that being comfortable with being uncomfortable, and that's what's in that pause. And when you think about from a stereotypical, but also from the data perspective with women, having all the answers, checking all the boxes, oftentimes drives how we lead and how we show up. And so I'm very interested to ask you, Kathleen, like, how have you reconciled that in the moments of your pause, you're not coaching to the answers, that you're actually taking the moment to figure it out, see what works, and not having that pressure, that you've taken that pressure off? How's that shift been for you?
Well, I can give you an example. It's hard to answer it in the abstract, but even a small company that I'm one of the leaders in, we have quarterly board meetings. I've started changing the agendas, so instead of boring old topics and everything, they're all questions. So people have to read the reports ahead of time, but instead of saying the financial reports and a bunch of blah, blah, blah on the agenda, it says, what if next year our wildest dreams would come true? What would our revenues look like? So instead of a word or something, and having a pause to think, how could I address this or ask this question in a more compelling way so that people actually think and they're not just sitting there, they're improvising.
I appreciate that example, that reframing, because in that reframing and that time to think, even if it's the hard stuff, there's a possibility that folks get into this space of possibility. Kind of what you said around the yes, that you're getting to that yes, even in the hard stuff or whatever, because you're reframing versus giving them the answer. It's just a report out. Is actually, I want you to take the time to think about this situation at a much deeper level and own something. That's the other part. It's very interesting that you all have all stepped back to let the people that you have put in place to own a part of this thing, and you've like pulled back a little bit. Would you all agree? Am I assuming this?
Like, some of it is intentional, some of it is by circumstance, for sure.
Okay. Yeah. Reframing, asking folks questions. I like to ask a lot of questions. So I'm going to ask another question. So overall, as we think about, we're here to talk about, leadership and women in leadership. What do you see are some of just the key challenges that are facing women today as they lead, and those who have not so boldly put the title on themselves as a leader? What are the challenges that they're facing?
Well, I think I've reflected on this a lot because many of our members, although we are open to everyone, many of our members are women, non-binary, and trans folks. At the Coven, we have about 1,000 folks in our network. And the thing that I hear the most is just the need to make moral decisions every day, like for every moment, especially in the pandemic, as primary caretakers or caregivers. When we think about, when we were asking ourselves questions in March of 2020, we're like, can I go to the grocery store? Is it okay to drive? Can I, like these things that we do every day that many of us don't think about, making those moral decisions every day weigh on us mentally. And then we have to go and do work, then we have to go and perform, or then we have to go and, drive numbers or whatever it is that we're responsible for. And then at the same time, also have to care for, young people, older folks, our partners, our friends. And so much of that work falls on women, non-binary and trans women. And I think a lot about how that weight is debilitating in so many ways. And there's not a lot of space to name that feeling of heaviness, name that feeling of overwhelmedness. And it's just kind of like a collective thing that we all go ahead and say like, yep, we're feeling it, but we have to just keep going. And there isn't like unfortunately, there is no like everyone closes between the 20th and the 3rd. you know, and I wish like we could just take a month off or take a couple of weeks off collectively as a society. So we could just say like, just pause, because there isn't like a collective great pause that we can take. Because even on our biggest days off, we have humans to feed and take care of, and, you know, all of those things. So I think those are some of the biggest challenges that our leaders are having right now, is making these big, giant moral decisions every day that should seemingly be easy, feeling the weight of caring for one another and themselves, which themselves probably get put on the back burner most of the time. And then having to, you know, show up as a leader in a space and like guide people through the uncertainty every single day. So, I mean, it's just kind of like this onslaught of weight that I think we carry quite a bit.
I appreciate you naming that. One of the things that I had to accept, and many accept, you know, consciously and unconsciously, you know, when you are the CEO of your life or the CEO of a company, a CEO of a product, you know, you might think it's the chief executive officer, but it's oftentimes the chief everything officer, because you're just doing all the things. And you literally every moment are fluctuating in between that title. And it's, you know, resource constraints, as you mentioned, it's just, the world is a dumpster fire and you just need to do it. And so it becomes this burden that I'm hearing you that is sometimes not optional to opt out. Like, I'm tapping out. You know what? I'm tapping out. I'm putting a sign in the air, so whomever come in my vicinity to know that I've tapped out. And that's not realistic for everyone. And so that chief everything officer becomes a burden. And it's something that I hope that we can talk about from a wellness perspective. How do you then reclaim your time and your space? But Akua, I think you wanted to jump in on that.
Yeah, so much of what Alex shared resonated, and I saw a question pop up in the chat. And I will say the two things that I see women leaders, either in my team or in my kind of social orbit, wrestling with is confidence in the face of uncertainty. And the question that was in the chat was, well, so that's the first thing. And then the second is equilibrium. And I talk about equilibrium and not balance, because I think balance is elusive and maybe even like impossible to achieve. But I heard Judy Smith one time talk about, instead of work-life balance, she talked about work-life equilibrium. And for whatever reason, that has stayed with me for years. And it has granted me a lot of space to give myself grace, you know, to just own one day I'm going to be really, really good over here and something might fall. That doesn't mean I'm not good at that. It means that I made a conscious decision to prioritize this over here. And sometimes those things change and like ebb and flow on a daily basis at times. And so like giving yourself the space to not necessarily have it all together at one time, I think is really freeing. But I would say on this navigating, the confidence to navigate during uncertainty, the most freeing thing that I have found in all of this is to say, I don't know, which sounds, it's counterintuitive as a leader. But I will tell you some of the most profound solutions have emerged from my team when I said, you know, we've got to achieve this, or here's where I'd like us to go. I'm not wed to how we get there. I don't know what the answer is. What do you think? You know, and so like not putting on yourself that you have to be chief everything officer, you know, just refusing that title, even though ultimately the buck stops with you. Acknowledging that you don't know something is an invitation to someone else's brilliance and leadership, and sometimes a pause.
I appreciate that. Confidence to navigate in the uncertainty. Whew, I certainly know that is not easy, not easy. Kathleen, that you want to chime in on that, or?
Yes, I think initially you were asking about the key challenges that women were facing in leadership and how that's changed during the pandemic. And I think the person who put something in the chat, I think, raises a good point that there are a lot of pressures facing women that were, in my view, they were always there. They were under the surface, and racism and sexism and fill in the blank isms have come to the forefront in our country and around the world. And so I think the challenges that have always been there are still there. They're maybe just heightened. And some of those challenges are internal within ourselves, so we have control over it. And some are external. And face it, there still is implicit and explicit bias. And now some people feel free to just act on that. And that's actually not a bad thing, because we know who our friends and foes are, so we can actually have conversations. Sorry about my dog barking in the background.
Living at work.
Yes, living at work. But I think that now more than ever, it's really important that we as women leaders promote ourselves. And I don't mean like self-promotion, but if we are the leader of an organization, we need to let go of other stuff that's not in our sweet spot and not be the chief everything officer. Even if we do know the answer, maybe it's more empowering for someone else to come forward. Even if I could answer all of those questions that the gentleman put in the chat, because he said he's a male friend of yours, Shawntera, why don't I wait and pause and find out what some of my male colleagues have to say, and we might find that we could join together and be allies. And so I think I mean, I could go on and on, but some of the key challenges are still there. The imposter syndrome, waiting to be asked, waiting until we're 100% qualified. Even when we get that promotion, we still don't want to impose on anybody. And so we're not even going to ask someone like our husband to pick up the laundry or something, or our spouse, our partner, to have them pick up the kids or whatever. And so I think that we need to kind of elevate ourselves and unite with others. I'm going to put mute on now.
Thank you for that. I appreciate you double tapping on that question. I think it's a matter of ensuring that let me like actually just make this point. The issues that are in the chat for those that can see about abortion rights, voting rights, racial inequities related to that, those aren't women issues. Let's just be very clear. Like, those aren't women issues. I just want to double tap on that. And so when those issues fail, society fails. And so it becomes this piece again, which I think is a thread around ownership from my good friend, who is a longtime executive in this community. If men don't step up to see that those are societal failures of not solving those and centering women, we will continue to have the inequities in the system. We will continue to have a society where women have to work extra harder because the weight and the responsibility of everything is put on the weight of women. And so it becomes a situation where on the outside is the reality of those issues that have been labeled women's issues are being decided by men, period. So go ahead.
Comment as Kathleen was talking and then thinking about the question in the chat, what occurred to me is that I never even thought about those things. That is like white noise in my mind. It feels like a constant thread. As I thought about the question, it was more like specifically to this moment. I feel like those other challenges, unfortunately, are so pervasive that they just serve as like white noise to me.
Yeah, I agree, Akua. I also thought about when I read all of the things that are in the chat that are issues, I was like, yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we should solve that.
Yeah. Well, and I think, Shawntera, like the point that we were talking about earlier, it's like not only are we dealing with things that are in our everyday, like things that I think about every day, like my kids, my family, my, school that we're going to, like, now, then we're also thinking about like the existential crisis of the universe, right? Of like what's happening, all of these things that you have listed that like affect me daily, but that are also, to Akua's point, like it's white noise. It's things like I can't control all of that. And so to the point of like, we all have to like do everyone has to do their part. And, in some of these areas that are seemingly women's issues, men need to step up and, like parental leave for men in many companies wasn't a thing until men asked for it, like more maternity leave, more parental leave truly like was not a thing until a guy was like, hey, like I would also like to take care of my kid when they're born, and I think that's just something to like remember is like there's a lot of power in that. Yeah,
I appreciate that. And it's thinking about from a standpoint of where is that support? Where is that support in leadership and understanding that the weight of society is on the shoulders of women, and where does that support come from a male perspective related to this? So there's that. So we have a question in the chat. How have you been able to integrate inclusive leadership in this virtual world that we're navigating?
I have a passion about this topic. So, in fact, I did a lot more DE&I, and I now call it DEIB with belonging in their coaching in organizations in the last couple of years during the pandemic. And the way I've been able to integrate inclusive leadership in the virtual world is really bringing in, I don't know if any of you have heard of positive intelligence or positive intelligence quotient, but they're mindfulness exercises and mental fitness exercises that you can do. And in my view, they increase your emotional intelligence. And in my view, when you look at DEI and B, diversity and equity are on one side of the one shore, and that's really about numbers and then treating people equitably in terms of your policies, advancing, etc. And it takes EQ, emotional intelligence, to build a bridge across to the other shore where you find inclusivity and belonging, because you have to connect emotion and connect heart to heart. And really, if you want to be the most successful business, you have to have the most diverse team, because the data just shows that multicultural teams, in terms of gender, race, ethnicity, and different perspectives, are the most innovative and the most profitable. And people aren't going to stay with a company or an organization unless they feel included, so they have a seat at the table. And then one step further, that they're not only included, but they feel like they belong. Whatever their gender is, whatever their preference, their in terms of religion is, that so there are some things that they choose, and some things we don't choose, but we're welcome and we belong, and we don't have to do things like code switch and pretend we're somebody different. We're not included as the token person. We're included, and then we actually belong because people know how to relate and emote with us.
I appreciate that. And you bringing in that mindfulness, really helping folks be able to center, which is helpful. We have seen a mad dash to, recruiting, for diversity with a number of organizations, because I'll just paint that picture because that's private, nonprofit, government, fill in the blank. But what usually happens, and what has happened, is that you recruit for diversity, but then you hire for assimilation. And so it's like, I really, really wanted to have a diverse pool, but all of the dimensions of that diversity that you bring, yeah, I don't know if I want it all. Just a little piece of that. And so assimilate into this culture. And so that, being able to, from a leadership perspective, have the courage. Because I think this, we have watered down this journey from a diversity and inclusion perspective, because it takes courage to sit across from someone that has a different life circumstance and to understand how they come at problem solving, critical thinking, and bring that into a product or service that you may have been working on for a long time, and to be challenged. That takes courage. And so it becomes this whole continuous loop of, I want diversity, but am I just hiring just to assimilate you into my culture? So I appreciate that. Akua and Alex, did you want to tap into this around inclusive leadership?
The one thing that I would add to that, so this is thank you, Kathleen, for sharing your thoughts, and Shawntera, yours as well. I'm learning, I'm making notes as I'm listening to you all. The one thing that is really interesting to me about being in the 100% virtual environment that has really supported inclusive leadership is I've got a number of introverted individuals on my team. And the chat has become a very important tool toward inclusion, including multiple thoughts and ways of coming at a topic. And so I've really appreciated that. We've got some folks to get real creative in the chat. You see personalities show up in ways that wouldn't necessarily show up in a meeting. And so that's, like, I'll say, one bright spot around inclusion in the virtual space.
I think so. One thing that we did with the Coven was when we had to, so we opened our St. Paul location and then 6 weeks later had to close due to COVID. And so we're closed for 3 months, reopened in July of 2020. But those 3 months were, really scary, especially as a, small business with another location that we also had to close for that time period. But we doubled our membership in that 3 months. And within 24 hours of having to close our business, we launched a digital community where we hosted 3 events a day to keep people connected. And this idea that Kathleen mentioned about belonging being so important in a time of significant isolation. And now, full circle, we're now, 2 years into this thing, and we're all sick of Zoom. But in the before times when it was new and novel, in a way for people to connect with one another, it was really important that we kept our community connected. And we did that through diverse programming, covering everything from, what type of services do you need in this moment? How can we support you mentally? Can we send you a box of beads and string to do something creative with your hands to take your mind off of the crumbling of the world? And so we really spent a lot of time thinking about what are the things that people need in this moment? And I think to take away from that, what we learned was a sense that there are other people out there who care about them, and there are other people out there who want to see them succeed in whatever this journey is that we're on, and that we're in this together. And so I think that was something that we have continued to do. I think we did it before the pandemic, and we just pirouetted our way into the digital space, like many organizations have. But I think that idea of belonging is so important, and exactly kind of what we built our business on. And it translated really beautifully into the virtual space when we had to.
I like to double click on that dance that you should do at the end. Yes. I really want to double click on this belonging, because Kathleen brought up, she said 2 things. She mentioned in terms of code switching, and in her introduction, she talked about folks bringing the best version of themselves. Tell me your thoughts on this code switching and bringing the best version of yourself into a place. What are your thoughts on that? And how do people be able to bring the best version of themselves when sometimes some versions of themselves, they should stay home. They should just stay home because they just don't work. What are your thoughts?
One thing that I'll just say this quickly because it resonates with me deeply is we talk about at the Coven, like bringing whatever version of yourself is available. And that's kind of what we think about with our members. Like you can be any version of yourself in our space, digitally and physically. Like whatever that version is, we care about it and we want to see it if you feel comfortable being in our spaces. And I think that's the same approach that I have with my employees. Is like, you're not always going to be your best self. I hope that you bring a version of best self into the work. I hope you pour some best self into that, into the work that we're doing. But I think truly it's about like whatever version of yourself that is. And I just need to know, I think like communicating that is really important. And like we talked about in the beginning, being, Akua saying like, this is how I'm coming to this conversation today, or this is how I'm feeling at work today. And I need you to know that so that when we have this meeting, I may seem XYZ. So I encourage my employees, I encourage our members to like be very open with us about how you're showing up, what version of you is here today so that we can best take care of you, or so that I know what to ask you and what not to. So being really intentional about that, I think is important. It's a lot more emotional work than I think many CEOs and leaders wanted to do. Like nobody said I wanted to be a therapist when, I mean, maybe some of you did, maybe some of you are therapists, but nobody woke up and was like, I would rather be a therapist today than a CEO. And that's sometimes just what you have to, that's just part of your job, is caring.
It's the caring and the listening. What I heard you say that's important, and it's this respecting the space to open up as best you can, and I really appreciate that when you name it. Where am I? When I call Akua and say it's shady Shawntera on the phone, and I'm about to say something real shady, or when I have the opportunity to, sit at a table with the governor's office staff and it's red word Shawntera, I might cuss. And so therefore be ready for that, because that's who's coming in the room, because this is where I am and this is what the calls for. So I hear you, that the importance of communicating clearly. And I think Akua said it well earlier, this extra level of context is important when you're in this environment to be able to have folks not walk away from the Zoom room like, what was that?
Kathleen, in your work, do you find that like when you communicate that you are able to show up in whatever version you are, that people do bring their best, like they will bring their best work to you? Maybe not every day, but they will bring some version of their best selves because you have now opened up that door for them to step in, to walk through.
Well, I think that it's complicated. So in a coaching session, whether it's individual or group, I want them to bring their authentic version of themselves, whether it's good, bad, or ugly, anything in between, similar to what you're talking about in your space at the Coven. You want people to feel comfortable bringing whatever version of themselves is there and then being transparent about that. That's different from when you're in the coaching space. That's where you should have a safe container and feel that you can be whatever version you're bringing to the table that day. When you're going out there as a leader, however, I think that's what I was talking about. What I'm helping people do is equip them so they can bring the best version of themselves as a leader, because we've for too long had leaders who haven't been bringing the best version of themselves. This is the way I am, and I'm just going to be this way. And so it's the version of yourself that is your authentic self. But like Shawntera said, well, what if your authentic self isn't someone that we should bring to the workplace today? Just being conscious of your impact on others as a leader, because we motivate people, we affect their mood. And so if we don't pause and say, where am I at today? And then if you aren't capable of bringing your best version, then be transparent and say, today I'm showing up as Kooky Kathy or whatever, or Shady Shawntera. I like that. And then own it and be transparent about it. And what I think for women, and I'm going to say underrepresented persons of whatever walk, because sometimes in coaching it's 80% female, so men may be underrepresented in many rooms. So it's the person who's underrepresented, and you're coming there and it doesn't feel like you can bring your authentic self because you don't feel like you belong yet. You were included, but you don't yet belong. That's where the code switching comes in, and it doesn't feel authentic. And so what I oftentimes am working with people on is how can you broaden your range of authenticity? Not that you're going to change who you are, but with intention, you can learn a different language. You can stretch your authenticity beyond your comfort zone so that you can have a positive impact on others. So if you know your version of yourself you're bringing isn't very positive that day, know what impact you're going to have on the culture and on the other people.
Yeah, that is a perfect segue into what I was thinking as I was listening to you all speaking in the question that Shawntera posed. I honestly feel like self-awareness to align my intent and my impact has been, for me, the antidote to code switching. So I think of code switching as like contorting myself to fit a standard. And I will say earlier in my leadership journey, I absolutely thought there was a way to show up. And I was coaching and providing direction and sometimes admonishment to my colleagues according to that one way. And as I have grown in my leadership, recognize that I'll give you an example. So I had a person on my team some time ago come to me and essentially say, you don't care, or it doesn't seem like you care because you do X, Y, Z, or these are the ways that you show up. And what I said to them is, so you are imposing your perspective of what a leader does or how they demonstrate care onto me, and I reject it. Like that ain't my story. That's not my leading orientation. And the reason why I'm able to accept you and all the perks that come with you and see the benefit of accepting all of you is because I create the space for myself to be whole. And so you get to decide whether or not you are able to accept that, but it's not changing, right? So like holding the space to be myself allows me to accept others as they come and to love all the quirks and all the things that come with that. I will say to the alignment of intent and impact, something that I've instituted on my team, and anyone who works with me will tell you about Filter Free Friday. So like in the midst of the pandemic, what I discovered about myself was that I still spent, even though I've worked really hard to integrate more of my outside of work and work self, there still were some things, or I was filtering quite a bit. And I did not discover how much energy I was putting into filtering my thoughts into whatever was expressed until the pandemic hit, and I had no more energy to give. Like it was done. And so I just started telling people on Friday, like I will work as hard as possible to center the thoughts and feelings of others in my expressions of displeasure or confusion, or in my quest to understand. But on Friday, it's Filter Free Friday. Like everybody knows, if I'm approached with like some mess on Friday, like you're going to get the fullness of Akua, right? And so like, you just got to know that I'm clear about it. I'm upfront about it. I never want to be angry or mean or rude about it, but I am by nature a very direct person. And I couch quite a bit of that in my day to day. And I just have decided and granted myself the space to not do that on Friday. And it's, Filter Free Friday has become Filter Free Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday. And I will honestly say, that I feel like I have a lot more energy to do the work that is required of me. And sometimes it is uncomfortable when Filter Free Akua comes out, when I would rather show up more buttoned up. And so like, it's been this interesting dance. But yeah, like I am working intentionally not to code switch.
So, and you call it filter free? I love that.
Filter Free Friday.
Filter Free Friday. Filter Free Friday. Akua said earlier that, she, told folks early on that it wasn't their business, but on Filter Free Friday, they get all the business if they're coming to her with something that is not up to par on Friday. I love that. Yes. And just a double click on what you said, Akua, that, you know, aligning that intent with that impact. And I think that speaks to a lot of just the work that's ahead of us in our communities, that, you know, there's a lot of activity. It's not aligning with the impact because the intention is not to get outcomes. And so when you have that guidepost as a human yourself, that's going to show up in how you do the work. So I think that's really powerful. So we are almost at time, and I just have one last question. You know, as you think about your leadership and women in leadership, actually, it's a two-part question. What's the best advice that you've gotten on your journey, filter-free, related to just you being a woman and leading? What's the best advice you've gotten? And then what gives you hope?
It's so hard. And this may not be the best, but this is what stands out for me. And it's basically to the effect of, don't be shy with sharing your accomplishments. Like, don't sell yourself short or play small. You're not serving anybody by playing small. And in fact, when you are fully occupying yourself and your greatness and that which makes you different, you're granting space to others and license and courage for others to do the same. And so I share that as advice that I've received that has been helpful, advice that I give to others when I'm mentoring. And it also is what gives me hope when I draw so much fulfillment by seeing growth and achievement by other young women and the folks in my charge. So thanks for the opportunity to share that.
Our society values scarcity so much. And I think coming from an industry, I worked in advertising for years, that was very about like one seat at the top for one woman, and she's definitely not Black. So like that was like exactly how so then when I like crawled up the ladder and got to the top, it was like, I have to protect this space. And I think that was so toxic. And I learned a lot about not being a bad leader in that space. And so I think one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was, your success does not mean my demise. And being so now bullish on supporting the women in my life and supporting women around me and making sure that I'm certainly not the last, you know, even if I might be the first. So that's something that I've learned over time, and certainly in my 20s did not embody, but have grown out of, thankfully, and have had many conversations with some of you on this call about that. So thank you.
I think I've had so much good advice over the years. So some of it echoes what's already been said. So I'll say something that has not, and that is keep speaking up and speaking out. And that gives me hope, because there are more people who are doing that, and we're doing that together. Women from all different backgrounds, and men, and also trans, and people who we actually don't have anything else in common other than our humankind and our hearts, and we can be aligned around that.
I love that. I love that. There's a lot of space at the top, and you know, when you do that, you don't smalls yourself, and when you have the megaphone, you should speak out. That's the advice that I think really epitomizes a true leader, you know, leading from the top. You know, I'm so grateful that you all spent time. You dropped a number of gems. Though I'll tell you a couple that for me is like, I'm not nice. Like to just say that, but I'm kind. You know, that's pretty bold, and bringing the best version of whatever self that you have at that moment. That's pretty powerful. And doing that in a way that you don't smalls yourself is important. We also learned that you should have some boundaries. Get yourself some boundaries. And if you don't have none, get some people that'll put some boundaries around you, because your mental health and well-being is very, very much so important. And in those times when it's uncomfortable, pause and reflect on where is the opportunity to be better and to do better and to leave space for other people to contribute. I think that that's powerful. And lastly, a couple of things that I think in this journey, when you are the chief everything officer, just know that some days will be good, some days will not. And you are in control of the responsibility of Kathleen said, you're a motivator. And so if you come in and you messing up, what Auntie Tab say, don't be messing up nobody else's day. If y'all don't know who Auntie Tab is, go ahead and Google her on the Instagram. You are in control of the room when you're a leader. And so how you show up is so, so important. So I thank you all just for your courage and the confidence that you have to navigate on this uncertain journey of leadership. And I'm so grateful. And I hope that everyone who joined us this evening is safe, because apparently there's some weather. And I also hope, because I would be remiss, that if you haven't contributed to the YWCA in their bold mission, that you will, because they're taking their mission to the next level and being unapologetic about eliminating racism and empowering women. And I think that is a very clear charge, because all problems are our problems and we should have a responsibility in solving them. So thank you all. Turn it back over to you, Nikki.
Wow, powerful, powerful stuff. I'd like to thank all of you for participating in this important and very eye-opening conversation. At YWCA St. Paul, we are on a mission, as Shawntera just said, to eliminate racism, empower women, and promote peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. One way that we do that is by facilitating meaningful conversations like the one we just had within this community. We also act on our mission through our programs focused on areas of significant racial and gender disparity, housing and support services, youth development, employment and economic development, and health and wellness. I hope you'll take the time to visit our website to learn more at www.ywcastpaul.org.